We're going to start with some rather practical uh, details about what exactly is an artist statement, or what are people expecting from when they ask you for an artist statement. So, as I mentioned before, this isn't something that's strictly defined, and other people may refer to this as an artist statement or an artist's statement, apostrophe s, indicating that it is written by the artist themselves. And sometimes you'll be asked for a project statement, or someone will ask for an artist statement, but what they're really wanting is a project statement. So first of all, it is important to ask questions depending on the context that you're providing this piece of writing for. So Marie-Lou already mentioned that there are some guidelines for Artch. So those guidelines would include maybe some specificities about the content of the statement, whether it is a general statement or whether you should be addressing a body of work specifically. And in these guidelines, normally people also provide a word count. So you have at least an idea of how many sentences you can use in order to describe your work. So always ask, when you're asked for an artist statement, always come back to the organization or whoever's asking you to find out more details about what they want. So the general distinction between the artist statement and the project statement is that an artist statement is, it's more general, and it covers ideas that your practice is concerned about or your interest as an artist. So the general artist statement is not necessarily specific to one project. It is more like an overlap of different artworks that you've produced. And in those overlaps, we start to see an artist's general concerns. So whether this is an artist statement or a project statement, your text should definitely read easily. The idea is that it's informative, so that it's not necessarily a piece that you're using to promote yourself, but it's rather a piece of writing that you're using to inform others about what your work is about, how you do it, and what your aim is. It's supposed to provide people with a general insight into your artistic practice. So a project statement, often we would write project statements in relation to maybe specific exhibitions. That would be a description of a body of work or a specific project. So a little bit about the length of the general artist statement. So this is usually a very brief introduction to who you are. So I put a guideline here of between 100 and 300 words, and we'll be looking at some samples later on that fall within this bracket, and it'll give you a better sense of how full an artist statement can be in less than 300 words. The artist statement is usually written by the artist in the first person. And that's natural because it is supposed to be you writing about your own work in your own words. However, it is possible in the guidelines that are given to you when people ask for an artist statement, they might ask for your artist statement in the third person. And in that case, you just modify your text to talk about yourself. And we'll look at that in more detail as well. So in your general statement, you want to provide insight into the general issues or ideas that are expressed in your work, and also, very importantly, how you carry those ideas out visually. So for example, the mediums that you use or the different processes or methodologies that are involved in your art making. The artist statement is often used as a support document. So it's rarely seen by itself, although it could be. So often it's used as a support document for artwork itself. It could be included on your resume. Most artists choose to put it up on their website, and also extremely relevant for building gallery applications, grant applications, or composing exhibition presentations around. So that's why this is a key document. It can be adapted and used in conjunction with many other purposes. And as I mentioned before, this text is something that should remain open and fluid. It's something that you need to update, both because your work is evolving and also because the context in which you're showing it is changing. So I think most artists, they don't have one statement only. They have a number of different versions of different lengths, and then they keep working from these statements and adapting them to the specific context. So, and again, I'll remind you that the language for this should be clear and easily understandable. You definitely want to consider that your reader is intelligent, so you don't need to write super simply, but you want to use words that are familiar to most people, not to cause any confusion. The point is to be clear and for the document to be useful. All right, so I'm just going to check in. Fanny, have you had any questions yet?
No, we're good.
Okay, all right, so I'll continue then. So we're going to jump right into like starting to write a statement, because this is actually, it's very, very simple. The instructions I'm going to give you are incredibly simple, but sometimes the simple things are the hardest things to do. So what you want to keep in mind, the three questions that you want to be able to answer with your statement is what, how, and why. Okay. In the what, you can ask yourself, what are your interests? What themes or contexts are you working within? What medium do you work in? How are you doing this work? So again, that could reply to the question of what medium that you're working in. But more importantly, it's what is your individual approach? What maybe makes your work a little bit different from others? So no matter what medium you're working in, whether you're working in painting or photography or filmmaking, we all have our individual signature. So it's up to you to try and identify what makes you slightly different from others and point to that in your artist statement. And then lastly, this is probably the most challenging question to answer about yourself, is why am I doing this? Why have I chosen this topic? Why do I work in painting? Why do I work slowly? Or why do I work intuitively? Or what is my aim? What do I want the audience to take from this? Why am I sharing it, for example? So these are three basic questions that can have a multiplicity of answers. So the best thing is to get them, all the different answers, down on paper, and then start working on editing it down from there. So we'll talk a bit more about that a bit later when we're working on the writing process. So I'm going to just start by giving you some examples that I've written about my own work, so you see how straightforward these answers can be. So to answer the question of what, so of course this is essential to your statement, because you're adding descriptive information about the work itself, what we see in the work, and the different themes that surround the visual aspects of that work. So for example, I'm a photographer, so I like to sort of combine this, the medium that I work in, with the things that I do, just to create one simple sentence that has a lot of information. So my photographic work is centered on the study of landscapes as cultural sites, focusing on themes that connect history, travel with cultural experience. So just from that one sentence, we know what medium I'm working in. I am working in the genre of landscape, and I'm making that clear in this first sentence. And within that genre, I'm talking quite a bit about culture, because when we talk about history and travel, those are cultural activities. So there is a strong focus on that. Okay, so just to move on to the how do I do this? So in describing how you make your work, you can discuss your method or approach. And this is also your opportunity to talk about things that are not visible in the work, from the idea, from the conception stage into the up until you have a finished work. So for some of you, your practices might be research-based, for example, or you might have a technique that is very important to the work that you want to talk about, or a way that in which you arrive to a visual approach. So for me, my straightforward answer to this is working with medium and large format film cameras. My projects often take a documentary approach. So very simple. And then if I want to expand on that, I'll add research, travel, exploring, and walking are important aspects of my process. I often spend more time observing and reflecting on my subject rather than capturing images. So here I'm talking about the slowness of working in the photographic medium that I do, which is also maybe counter to the subjects that I am exploring, because often I'm working with travel and tourism as a subject. So if you see my work in relation to these sentences, it would make a lot of sense. Keywords such as documentary, slowness, travel, exploration. But it's also important to talk about research, because I think the research aspect maybe is not so visible in the work. Any questions, Fanny?
No. Does
Okay.
anybody want to ask a question?
All right, so moving on to the third question. So the why. Now this is really the toughest, and I think this changes maybe every time I have to submit a statement. I fluctuate on why I'm doing this. I mean, one simple answer is, as a practicing artist, is that I can't really help it. But then maybe that's a bit vague. So in my statement, I try to clarify why these ideas. So to answer this question, at least one way, I can describe myself as curious by nature. So curious by nature, anthropology and archaeology have always fascinated me. By examining places such as historical sites, tourist destinations, and small communities, my work aims to reflect on how landscape shapes us and how we, in turn, shape the landscape. So if we put these three or four sentences together, we are going to have a very short, about 100 word artist statement that actually provides quite a bit of information about what I do, how I do it, and why I do it. But I don't think it's that simple. Often we need to connect these ideas with other sentences to make our statements sound maybe more individual, as someone had brought up earlier, to make the voice more individual to you as an artist. So that's why it's good to have a little bit of flexibility for the word count. Okay, so if you have room for more, so if you have, let's say, a 250 or 300 word limit for your artist statement, there are other things that you can add into your statement. So some people like to talk about what are your influences, or maybe more specifically how your work might fit into a specific tradition. So how does this relate to art theory, for example, or the history of art, or even contemporary art practices? So that's of course something that you should know about yourself. Where does your art fit in? And sometimes we actually don't realize that we are working in a tradition. We don't recognize maybe our signature. So it's really important to look at other people's work and observe the different trends and see how you may or may not fit in with them. And another question that you might want to address in your statement is what you want people to understand through seeing your work. So you're not necessarily analyzing your own work, but you're pointing the viewer in a specific direction, or you're giving them something to think about. Maybe it's just something that you think about and you want to make them aware of your own thoughts. So this is another question that would be useful to include in an artist statement. Also, another note about traditions or influences. I don't suggest providing a list of artists that you are interested in or that you idolize, especially because some other, your reader might not know their work, so they don't see the relevance between your work and the artist that you're mentioning. So it can be useful to employ the work of others or traditions that are known to others as a way to explain the direction that your work is headed in, especially as either an emerging artist or an artist who might be proposing an unfinished project. So I think for Artch, for example, you're going to be preparing an artist statement that is maybe general about your work and includes some details about the work that you'll be presenting in this particular context. But sometimes you're going to be making project proposals for work that does not really exist yet. You know your interests, you know a project that you might want to do, but you're not sure actually what it's going to look like yet or how you're going to do it. So referencing other artists can be useful in this instance. Okay. All right, so now on to the structure of the artist statement. So personally, I like to work with a logical structure. So the examples that I provided you, it started with the what question and moved on to the how and the why. Because I like to build up or get to the point, so to speak, and then build up to how the work relates to its context. But every artist is different, and the best way to get to know yourself is to go back to other pieces of writing that you might have already written before anyone tells you how to write, for example. Go back to your own writing and see how your mind thinks. Do you think in this logical progression of what, how, why, or do you start with a question? Do you start with some larger thoughts about the world or the context that we're living in, and then create work in reaction to that? So if personally, the reverse of the logical structure is more comfortable for you, then you can go ahead and utilize that. Then there's also the creative approach, which may involve more storytelling or freestyle writing. This is also not against the rules, but it is much more challenging to not follow a given structure. Sometimes using a structure will provide the confidence that you need to move forward in the writing. And so if the creative approach does not feel natural to you, I wouldn't suggest going with it. That's more reserved for artists who are very comfortable with the writing process already. Okay, so I've spoken quite a bit about this general artist statement, and I'd like to give a few specificities about the project statement. So this is the case where somebody has asked you to write an artist statement that addresses a specific body of work. So this is often, for example, used in an exhibition text. These writings are often a little bit longer than the general artist statement because you're given the opportunity to go into details and specifics about the work that you have undertaken. When preparing your project statement, you have to remember that the reader may not know you. Okay, so that means that they might not have your bio. They might not be aware of where you are in your career or the work that you've already done. And so you may need to include aspects of your general artist statement as an introduction to this text. And then you move on to the specifics of the project in which you're presenting. Even though that this text can go on for almost a page, what is really important is that by reading, when the reader comes to the end of your text, they are able to summarize what you're doing or what you aim to do in just one sentence. So if you're not able to do this yourself, then it's unlikely that your reader is going to be able to do that as well. So it's really important to ask yourself this question at the end of either your writing your artist statement or project statement. Am I able to summarize what I do in one sentence? Oftentimes your artist statements or your project statements, they're being read in the context of a jury or a committee. So oftentimes you're submitting to something, either to become part of a program. It could be along with your portfolio. It could be a grant application or a gallery application. So when a jury is reading 20, 50, or 100 artist statements, the ones that are very clear and succinct are the ones that are going to stay in their memory. And when the jury gets together to discuss the works that they've read, it's just very practical for them to say, oh, the artist who does this, or the artist who addressed that. And if they can't do that, if your artist statement or project statement is too complex to be able to reduce it to one or two sentences, then you're not going to be as easily identifiable. So that's one of the practical reasons. To help you with the writing process, so we're gonna get into the process in more detail, but just to help you get started, and I do suggest that even if you already have an existing artist statement, that you put it aside and you start all over again after this workshop. It doesn't mean that you might not borrow a few sentences from your older version later, but it's good to start completely fresh. So outline some of the things that we've talked about in the seminar. So what are you trying to do, say, with your work? How did you carry out your work generally or the project? What is your process? Why is the project relevant? So when we're talking about relevance, we're talking about context. So your personal context, social context, contemporary context, and also the audience. So who is the audience of this work? Is it specific? Is it general? And what do you want them to understand and think about after seeing your work? And also to remember, this wasn't the who wasn't included in my 3 general questions, because many artists tend to work alone, but not everybody does. And so if you're somebody who works collaboratively or who works with other people as a subject, it's really important to talk about them as well. It's not, your artist statement is not necessarily just about you, but it's about your relationship with others and how you work with others. So that is definitely something that should be included. We'll see that as well in a few samples that I'm going to provide. All right, so we are going to move on to the biography before we come back to the process. The biography is, I would say, a little bit more straightforward because it's mostly factual information, and it's more or less it's built up from things that you know that are very clear about your background, such as like, where do you live and work, where did you study, you know, what events have you participated in, and so on. So a lot of these things are already listed on your CV, and so you're working from that like existing document or knowledge of these events having taken place. So this document, it should be short. So I put between 80 and 250 words. This is what I've been asked for when people have asked for my bio. They've asked me for as little as 80 words, which is quite succinct, and up to 250 words, which you can get into a little bit more detail with. I think Artch is going to ask for about 250 words. So it's an opportunity to tell a little bit more about yourself. So this is also a support document that you'll use in conjunction with your resume. You can also post it on your website and include it in an exhibition presentation. Most arts organizations and institutions will ask for biographies because they're very handy documents for them to use to promote the work that you're doing and also credit you for the work that you're doing. So just like the statement, you'll be using this, this text over and over again, but it's really important to tailor it every time. So you tailor it for the specific instance and the context, and also update it depending on the, the new activities that are coming up or occurring. So the language in this is very factual. The biography doesn't need to be a piece of creative writing. It's not necessarily like reflecting your the work itself, but a good writer can make their biography feel more personal just in the use of words and language, and also maybe there can be little aspects of storytelling, especially if it comes to your own personal background. And this text is normally written in the third person. Most of the time people will ask you for the biography in the third person, which is a bit awkward because it's you're the one preparing usually your biography. So you're talking about yourself. So this is the content of the bio. So first of all, background information on yourself. So whatever may be relevant. So either where you were born or where you currently live and work. It could be both if both are relevant, but most people just put where they're currently living and working. The medium that you work in, or just indicate that if you are multidisciplinary, that you are multidisciplinary. I think it's important to include at least one sentence about your interests, themes, or contexts. So this sentence can be pulled from your statement. I find that this is an important part of the biography because what you're interested in is a really important part of who you are. And then we have the more factual information that you can pull from your CV. So where have you studied, or where did you complete a degree? Notable awards or distinctions that you've received, exhibitions that you've participated in, residencies, publications, etc. So some other people might have jobs that they work in that are relevant to their art practice, and they may want to include that as well. So other relevant information can be, for example, if you participate in sort of the artistic community, if you're on a board of directors, if you worked in curatorial projects, if you collaborate with others, or if you have any kind of affiliation with a research institution, artist-run center. It sounds like a lot to fit into a 80 or a 250 word text. So getting into the structure, I mean, this will vary depending on the word length, but it's generally 1 to 3 paragraphs. Most people will prepare a bio of only 1 paragraph, but we will also look at some examples where the biography has divided into 3 paragraphs for logical reasons. I find it really useful to begin with the artist's name. So the first 2 words of your biography is your first and last name. That way, right away, we know who is being talked about. And to avoid repetition, so in my case, if I'm writing about Jessica Auer, so I don't say Jessica Auer, Jessica Auer, Jessica Auer over and over again. You can refer to yourself by only your last name, or alternate between pronouns. So whatever pronoun you go by, it can be, you can talk about she, he, him, her, their, they, however you feel comfortable with. And the aim of just changing this around is to avoid the repetition of every sentence, for example, starting the same way. You may see, when you look at some people's biographies, you may get the impression that they are simply listing the different activities that they've participated in or listing their achievements. I would rather not read a biography that is a list of someone's achievements. For me, it's more interesting to just see the important details. So instead of writing a list of everything that you've done and making this biography very long, maybe you just want to talk about your most prominent activities that you participated in, highlight some interesting or the activities that you were most excited about participating in. So a lot of people, for example, they will list their exhibitions. But for some artists, the residencies that they participated in is more important to them or says more about them and their work. So they would talk about residencies instead of exhibitions. You may just want to talk about your recent exhibitions or your upcoming exhibitions, just to keep it current and relevant. So in terms of structure, I usually like to conclude something with something current. So you can say that you are currently studying somewhere, currently exhibiting somewhere, or have an upcoming exhibition somewhere, and that positions your biography in a specific time. And I think it's also more exciting for the reader to sort of identify that you are currently active. Let's have a look at a few bios so that you can see the similarities between them. So these, I've chosen all Canadian artists, which are either like late emerging or beginning of mid-career. So these artists, they do have some experience with writing biographies, meaning they've done it for at least 5 years, and so they've gotten to the point where they're putting relevant information in there, and it's relatively well articulated. And so we'll start with Jim Holyoke. So I'll read this one out loud, and you can follow along. I have a few samples, and I won't read them all, but I'll start with Jim. So Jim Holyoke is a drawer and writer based in British Columbia, Canada. His discipline is comprised of book arts, ink painting, and room-sized drawing installations. In parallel to his solo practice, Holyoke has orchestrated numerous collaborative drawing projects, often with fellow artist Matt Shane, and sometimes involves hundreds of people drawing together. Holyoke received a BFA from the University of Victoria, an MFA from Concordia University, and studied as an apprentice to master inkpaper Shen Ling Yang in Yuzhou, China. China. He has attended artist residencies in New York, Los Angeles, Mumbai, Banff, the Netherlands, Finland, Sweden, Iceland, and throughout Norway. His work has circulated widely in Europe and North America, including the Musée d'Art Contemporain de Montréal, the GEM, Museum of Contemporary Art in The Hague, Tegnerforbundet Drawing Association in Oslo, the Latvian Center for Contemporary Art in Riga, and the Carnegie Mellon International Drawing Symposium in Pittsburgh. Holyoke's work was featured in the We Are Monsters issue of Border Crossings magazine and Feminism's issue of S magazine. So if we go over this bio, we'll see that it is like very straightforward. It immediately presents what does Jim do? He's mostly drawing. He's also a writer. He's based in BC, Canada. We know the different disciplines that he works in within drawing, but also in installation. And right away in the third sentence, he discusses the person that he often works with, which is Matt Shane. It's one of his collaborators, and also how he involves other people in his work. So those first three sentences, they're the most important because it gives us insight to his practice. Following that, it's mostly highlights from Jim Holyoke's CV. So where he studied, the different residencies that he's done, where he's shown, and where his work has been featured. So this is rather long for a bio. It doesn't have to be this long. But you can see that he does have he has participated in many different activities, and they're all quite impressive. So it makes sense to include most of these. I have different suggestions to get started for brainstorming different texts that you might be writing. So there is starting from keywords. This is my personal favorite. I really like working with the keywords. So identifying the sort of major undercurrents of my work just through singular words. Another is to free write. So that means write as much as you can without any hesitation within a prescribed amount of time. And then the last one is mind mapping. So if you haven't heard of mind mapping, I'm just going to show you this this chart, which provides like a good example of how to build a mind map. It is tricky because you might not know what is the central topic when you do your first mind map. So just start with anything, the first thing that comes to mind. For my work, and it can be landscape, it could be culture, it could be tourism, in a very broad sense. And then from that central topic, you start to draw lines that connect these ideas with other ideas. And then you can scrap that map and start again with a new idea in the central topic. So if you like doing this on paper, it's great, but you can also do this online. I put the link there to a website that has like a mind mapping software, so you can just type your ideas into the software. It's called mindmeister.com. But right now, during this workshop, we're going to go back to the keywords. So if everyone has a pen and paper, we're going to start. We're going to go back to this structure of thinking about the what, the how, and the why. And we're going to apply this to the artist statement. Okay, so we're leaving the bio behind now, and we're going to concentrate on the artist statement, which is, in my opinion, the tougher document to draft. So first exercise is to use specific keywords to describe your own work. So I would like you to make 2 columns on your paper, to either 2 boxes or 2 columns. And on one side, I would like you to write some keywords about your practice in general. So these are your interests, concerns, themes. It could be some of your visual signatures. And then on the right-hand column, I want you to pick one project. It could be your most recent project or the body of work that you feel is most complete. So let's start with the left-hand side. And we're going to do this for 1 minute. So all the keywords that you can think about to describe your practice in general. All right, so now that you're fresh, we're going to get into or dive into a much more challenging exercise. So this one is free writing. So you're going to need a clean sheet of paper. You're going to need a full page for this. So just take a minute to reach out and gather that. So this exercise is most important for those of you who are extremely uncomfortable with having to do it. And that's why I'm going to ask you to do it now and not after the workshop, so that you have no choice but to use this time dedicated. So in this free writing exercise, you're going to have 8 minutes to generate text. So you're going to write as much as you can in 8 minutes without fear that you're writing anything wrong or absurd or grammatically incorrect or out of order. There should be no concern for too much or too little. It's not about quantity, and you don't have to worry about sharing. So I'm not going to call upon anyone to share what they have written during these 8 minutes. So no filter, and think about also writing as if maybe you're writing to a friend. It might make it easier. So you can use this opportunity to tell a friend about what you do, how you do it, and why you do it. And you might feel more comfortable if it has a little bit of a personal feeling to it. The next step will be to go through your keywords and the free writing, and circle or highlight the information that you think is most relevant, the most relevant information that came out of this exercise. So from here, we're going to be talking about the preparation of your artist statement. For if you're in the Artch program, then for Artch, and if you're in Artbolt, then for whatever reason you might have signed up for the workshop because you want to write an artist statement for your website, or you're applying for something and you want to improve your writing. So from here on out, the best thing is to get started right away on a first draft. And as I mentioned before, if you have an existing artist statement, I would actually put it aside. I wouldn't cling on to it. You might come back to it after your new first draft, but start free from those from the past and from those other thoughts. So with the keywords in the free writing exercise, you can feel free to do it again. As I mentioned, it's good to put yourself in the context of where you make work or environment or have your work in front of you, and either redo the exercise or from here go on to highlighting all the relevant material. It could be just words, or it could be entire sentences if the sentences were already flowing quite freely. And then you need to organize these thoughts, because chances are your free writing or your keywords are not in any kind of order. They're just thoughts that are randomly coming to you. So put yourself maybe in the position of the reader. Like if I was a reader, what would I want to know first? And then what question does that first sentence, what question does that raise? And go on to addressing and answering and reflecting further on the main ideas. And then slowly those sentences will turn into paragraphs. And at this point, don't worry if the paragraphs seem out of order. Often paragraphs do move around from the beginning to the end of a drafting session. So you can restructure a lot of this towards the end. It's more important to get a lot of writing out. So after you've written your first draft, you don't show it to anybody yet. You still hang on to it. So don't send it to me after your first writing session. It's important to let that draft sit for a day or two and come back to it with some distance. So get a good night's sleep, come back to it in a day or two, and then you want to reread it and rework or clarify some of the statements that might be a bit vague. You might need to add detail, or you might need to delete some information that is suddenly feeling less relevant to you. Work on the restructuring of both sentences and paragraphs. And at this point, you might want to consider the word count. So I wouldn't get too worked up on this right at the beginning, because you will have this general artist statement that you can either make longer or shorter depending on the context. But if you're working towards Artch statement, we know that it's 250 words. So at this point, you want to aim for that. So if you're under, then you can add some sentences that clarify your ideas. And if you're over, then you can shorten either just by deleting words that are unnecessary, or entire sentences that feel that they don't need to be there in order for the reader to understand what you're aiming for. Go over your document for proofreading. Like personally, I also ask other people to proofread my work because I have tendencies towards skipping words altogether. Like I see them on the page, but they're not there. Words like a and the, or your becomes you. So if you already know that you have these small mistakes that you make repetitively, then it's good to have another person revise your text. So it can be a friend or a family member. It doesn't need to be a professional. And then when you feel it's ready, then go through this checklist, so to speak, to make sure that you have addressed all the ideas. So what is the work is about? How did you make it? Why did you make it? And if your work is specific to a particular context, then you should be addressing how it is relevant to that context. It might seem obvious to you, but it might not be obvious to your reader. And then this is where this is the only point where you should start being very critical with yourself, because you have to put yourself in a more objective position and consider, are your ideas relevant? Do they sound innovative and insightful? And by this, you're not asking yourself if you're some kind of genius or if you're the first person to ever do this. It's not about that. It's more about how the writing comes across and whether it is a reflection of the work that you're making. So at this point, that's when you do send it off to an editor. In this case, you have the opportunity to have me edit it. But as I mentioned before, I also have my own network of proofreaders and editors. And so you can also send it out to other people to ask for their advice. And when you get it back, it's not just the question of fixing grammatical errors, but of addressing the editor's questions or the comments that they may have. And because these pieces of writing, they're often personal, they can be difficult to respond to some of the questions. It can be frustrating, but you have to understand that the person who's revising it is just trying to help you. They're trying to make you construct a better text. So it's important that you don't disregard any questions or comments that an editor makes, but really think about it and think about how you can improve on those comments. Often printing your text out. I know that not many people are printing today, but I find that's really helpful to print the text and then reading it off screen, as well as reading it out loud. I know some people say that they work better under pressure, but in that case, I would just give yourself a fake deadline instead of testing that theory that you work better under pressure or under stress. And just remember that writing, it gets better with practice, like anything else. I don't think anyone writes something totally amazing in their first draft. It takes a few versions to get somewhere that you're pretty confident and happy with in terms of its clarity. So we're going to move on to looking at some sample statements. We looked at sample biographies before, but we haven't looked at sample statements yet. I didn't want to present them too early because it's really important with a statement not to copy paste from other artists, but more look at what's working well in other people's statements or maybe not working so well. So let's look at, we already saw Jim Holyoke's bio. So now we're going to read a little bit about his work through his statement. So I'll read the first one out loud again, and then we'll go through the others individually. All right, so Jim Holyoke, and he's writing in the first person. I did mention earlier in my guidelines that usually the artist statements are written in the first person, but we will see an example of artists writing in the third person, and I believe Artch is also asking for third person. So keep that in mind. All right, so my discipline is composed of drawing and writing, artist books, and room-sized installations, exploring, or perhaps wandering, the border realms between perception and fantasy, humanity and the non-human, deep time and the present. What we think about, remember, and imagine has powerful effects on how we perceive and experience, on what we believe, and how we behave. This is what prevents me from dismissing the imaginary as completely unreal. Over the last 20 years, I have amassed an enormous collection of papers, ranging in scale from postcards to murals, drawn, written, wrinkled, and saturated with ink. Some are pieces unto themselves, some are pages for hand-bound books and zines, and some are materials for dense installation environments, tailored to the architecture of the rooms that they occupy. Through the content of my work, the content of my work ranges from the biographical to the phantasmagorical, there's a persistent interest in human empathy for other species, and in the difficulty of fathoming deep time, the world millions of years ago, and the world ahead. The animals I contemplate most are the species that never existed, that no longer exist, and those that are on the brink of extinction. For example, dinosaurs fascinate me because they're completely real and completely imaginary. They are monsters for real. This tension between what is real and imaginary, what once existed and no longer exists, is the uniting principle in all my work. Just as fairy tales often serve as cautionary function, I hope these drawings of monstrous beings and lonely places will cast shadows of doubt over assumptions of human preeminence. So if we look at the word count at the bottom, you'll see that it's only 261 words. Yet it is more or less a complete statement. I'm not sure that anyone reading this feels like they need to have more to have a good grasp on Jim Holyoke's work. So if you remember at the beginning, I gave the guidelines is between 100, I said 100 and I think 300 words. So although some artists might go to 400, I don't feel that it's particularly necessary for the general artist statement. All right, so we're gonna go to the next artist, and I'm not gonna read this one out loud. I'll let you read these ones following in silence. So José Pedno. We've read 4 statements, and I just want to point out that they were mostly around the 200 word mark. So with Joanie was under 200, José 150, and Edward Jansen 220. In each of the statements, we do see that the artist is getting to the point with what are the topics that they explore, whether it's fantasy worlds, and, mythological landscapes, or the Cold War era fascinations, and the reproduction of landscape into images. So we see that right away each of the artists gets to the point, and they are talking about their work generally and not about specific projects. And from there, they've all also moved on to support like how they do this, or why they do this, and that brings the work like a certain level of let's call it like it brings the work a little bit of authority. Like you start to say, okay, well, I believe that this artist knows what they're talking about because they've thought about it and they've been working on it for a long time. Just to wrap it up and give you some sort of very final tips. A lot of it I've already mentioned, but I really want to repeat it and also provide a couple examples, like pull some examples from the statements we just looked at. It's really important to get to know your work, and having been an emerging artist or having to write about projects that are very fresh, I know that this is not always easy. It's getting to know your work often means taking some distance from it. I think it's very difficult to analyze your work maybe while you're doing it, and easier if you stop doing it, you take a step back and you look at it from a little bit of a distance. That's either a time or a space distance. So first things first is make sure that you do have samples of your work around you when you start writing, so that you have something to refer to. Then with the statement, it's important to get to the point right away and stick to it without going on too many tangents. So if we look at Jansen's statement, it begins right away with this sentence: "My work comprises a wide-ranging, playful examination of the Cold War era." So it's a very short sentence. It almost sounds like incredibly specific for a general statement that this artist focuses exclusively on the Cold War era. But when you think about that era, it was a long time, and it was there was all kinds of ideology occurring during this time era that many people related to. So in essence, it's a work that covers a very long period in history. And he talks about how it is wide ranging, and also mentions that it is playful. And that's an important aspect of his work. That's a stylistic aspect that everyone also needs to think about. What style tends to what descriptions can we use to describe our style? So like I mentioned before, I'm documentary. In the case of Jansen, it's playful. The next is to make it interesting. So I mean, we're getting to more and more difficult parts of the writing process here. So how do we make it interesting? It means that when you get to the heart of the idea, that you can back it up with some reflections to pass on to the viewer, so that they don't just read it and accept it, but they think about it themselves. So Jim Holyoke says in his statement, after talking about these fantasy worlds and dinosaurs, this is what prevents me from dismissing the imaginary as completely unreal. And that sentence comes at the end of a paragraph. So it gives you the chance to think about that sentence for yourself, and think about what you accept as real or imaginary as the viewer. Another strategy is to keep your language basic, but you can make the writing more sophisticated through the combination of words. So I've said many times that you should, that clarity is important, that you shouldn't over theorize your work. I mean, this advice is pretty standard across anyone teaching this topic. Nobody says make your statements really fancy and difficult to read and use all kinds of jargon. No one's going to tell you that, but somehow these jargon words tend to make themselves into text because of the discourse or the language that we use within academic frameworks. Try to leave those words behind. Use more familiar versions of the words and make your writing more sophisticated by combining simple words. So one example would be from Joanie Tremblay's statement. She says, "In our contemporary times, our understanding of place has been entirely affected by its many simulations and reproductions, ranging from films and photographs to theme park attractions, computer games and advertisements, from pages to screens to physical spaces and back again." So what makes this what makes this one sentence well written is that she's able to add a lot of ideas into it, but say it as clearly as possible, with words that are easy to follow and a sentence structure that is easy to read. And then finally, I mean, there's a lot more tips that I could add, but I'm trying to keep this succinct. My last piece of advice would be to use an active voice. And this comes back to having some confidence in your work and yourself and being assertive when you write about it. So avoid using phrases like I am trying to or I hope to, and use words that are more assertive, like reveal, examine, or question. So if we look at José Pedno's statement, she says that she freely adopts scientific research methods. So she's confident about this, even though she's not a scientist, even though she is an artist. She's confident about this decision to freely adopt it and interpret scientific methods through her artwork. Finally, as demonstrated through the few image examples that I provided, it's really important that the writing match the work. So when you read your text and see the work together, it should be cohesive. And it's helpful to bring this to other people. So family members, friends, or other people in your network, and ask them honestly, do these two go together? And if they're a good friend, they should be able to be honest with you. So finally, be honest with yourself, true to the work, keep it simple, don't over theorize. Most audience should be able to understand the language you use. And remember that the statement is meant to clarify your ideas and not mystify the reader.